Hey guys! How are all of you beautiful people doing? I hope you all are having a great day. And yes, this is the next part of I Became Shikamaru Nara, where the world that once seemed fictional is now real. Shinobi, chakra. It's all so close. After being reborn in the body of a deceased child, the hero has a second chance to live this life anew. Having found a new home and clan, he will have a long and difficult journey. But the object that was found in the past and changed his fate is still with him. Now, with this power, he will follow the path of the strongest Shinobi. So without any delay, let's start the series. At the same time, Shikamaru slowly began to feel the effect of the chakra cleansing pill. Realizing that his body was heating up, he immediately realized that something unpleasant could happen, so he jumped up and quickly stripped down to his underpants. I already remember the effect of some pill, I don't want to spoil my clothes anymore. Concentrating, Shikamaru continued to transfer the effect of the pill. The strangest thing is that there was no pain, rather a tingling sensation in all tanketsu and a slight burning sensation in all chakra channels. But it didn't hurt, rather a little discomfort. 20 minutes later, Shikamaru finally opened his eyes and let out a long breath. Noticing that his friend finally woke up, Kji ran up to him and asked, "Are you like Shikamaru? Your body, Shikamaru slowly lowered his head and only grinned wryly. As I thought, if cleansing is written, then you should be ready for something like that. Amplification rebuilds the body and uses its effects in conjunction with the capabilities of the human body, and this seems to lead to different excretions from the body." Shikamaru's entire body was now covered in a viscous, transparent liquid like snot. A large accumulation of this liquid was at the main points of the tank, in different limbs. This was sensible, since the pill cleared the channels. It was a bit unusual for Shikamaru, though. All these toxins in the past world were nothing more than a myth on which various charlatans liked to make money. Treatment with fire, various alternative medicine, people could spend a lot of money on them. As for Shikamaru, he was not particularly convinced of the effectiveness of these methods. But in this world, it seems that this is in the order of things. Well, there is chakra, so you can take it. Smiling, Shikamaru walked briskly towards the river. Rinsing himself quickly, he inhaled deeply of fresh air. He didn't really feel the changes, even the channels weren't very different from the past. The pill simply cleared them of unknown toxins. Actually, Shikamaru did not use chakra very often, so it might be worthwhile to postpone this pill. Not really worrying about it, Shikamaru returned to Kji and said, "Let's practice, and tomorrow we'll start the most difficult part." The difficult part? Kji tensed a little. Smiling, Shikamaru waved his hand. "Don't be afraid, everything will be fine with you, now it's my turn to suffer." Seeing his friend's eerie grin, Kji suddenly felt uneasy. "Oh, and I don't like it." The workout went pretty quickly. Kji was not particularly tough, so Shikamaru had to do almost everything himself. Kji didn't even have taijutsu skills. Although his father taught him a little, but only the basics. And Kji himself was not particularly interested in training, since he always did not succeed in something. But Shikamaru was very patient, he tried to teach his friend everything he knew, even though his knowledge was limited. After drawing up some training plan for Kji, the guy finally headed home, tired and haggard. This day was the most amazing in his life, and although he was tired, he unconsciously smiled and was even happy. The pill was difficult to take, but Kji felt the effect very clearly. He felt himself lighter, even with his weight. In training, he held out much longer than in the past, which gave him even more confidence in the future. It's decided. I will train with my brother Shikamaru. Watching his friend slowly leave, Shikamaru closed the door of the house and returned to the forest again. He decided to keep the detox pill until the time he received new bloodlines. As for the elixir of elemental enhancement, he was ready to accept it right now. He left another pill to stabilize the pedigree until better times. They are now unlikely to be useful to him. So in the future he will find a worthy candidate for it. Still, it costs 500 points, which is quite a lot. He was not going to distribute such expensive medicines to just anyone. As for chakra recovery pills, now they were useless. Shikamaru didn't have enough chakra to use them. But in the future they could well come in handy. Their price was not very high and they did not have any side effects. But even so, such pills were not at all a particularly useful purchase. It was very unprofitable to spend points on them. They were restoring the normal genin reserve and that was their maximum. In general, from these awards Shikamaru did not receive many useful things. Even the elixir for enhancing the elements of the wind was useless. A mere 2% didn't really change anything for him. Unless the glasses of fate and the forbidden scroll were worth something, and everything else was so-so. Opening the lid of a small bottle of clear liquid, Shikamaru drained it in one gulp. This thing had no taste at all, and Shikamaru did not feel the effect. But he did not attach much importance to this. It is probably impossible to feel 2% at all. It is almost a drop in the ocean. With such a small compatibility it would be too difficult to manage the wind. Fortunately, this is probably not impossible. After all, some Shinobi are able to transform more than 3 elements and this is due to training. So it was not very profitable to buy such elixirs. Probably, this will be of use only when the time comes when it is impossible to increase performance on your own. Next, while there was time left, Shikamaru checked the scroll. B-rank shadow cloning technique. Getting this scroll can now be called a stroke of luck. But in reality, this is not entirely true. First, Shikamaru may well have found this technique on his own. This isn't some super forbidden technique unlike multiple shadow cloning. And that is probably difficult to call that. Secondly, there was not much sense from her now. Shikamaru could well have performed it. It was not particularly difficult, only he lacked chakra and was quite noticeable. The minimum to use it, you need an amount of chakra like genin, and he was not even close to this level. At least, judging by the task of becoming a genin, where chakras needed 200 points. The bottom line was that a very low amount of chakra could harm the user, and if the current Shikamaru split it, then it could be unsafe, although possible. Now he wanted to wait a little and reach at least 100 points in the chakra. Looking at it now, the technique was ultimately useful, but in the future. With a good imagination and a huge supply of chakra, you can create a lot with it. Yeah, and how could Naruto create hundreds of clones at once? This is how much chakra is spent. And he also called himself a loser when he fought with Neji. What a sly one. With a wry smile, Shikamaru finally decided to go home. He had big plans for tomorrow. After that, he will learn a little history, and then only hard training until the academy itself. It will be necessary to stabilize all abilities, and learn to master new powers. Of course, if possible, it is worth talking about this with your father. After all, his ignorance can be costly in the future. Secrets are important, but not like Shikatsumiyaku or Bakugan. After receiving them and teaching control, a conversation with the head of the clan is necessary. Okay, it's too late, it's worth a good night's sleep, I sense that soon I won't have time for sleep. The next morning was almost normal, only Shikamaru had to wait for Kji as they agreed to train together this time. After training, the right moment finally came for which Shikamaru was just waiting. Sitting more comfortably by the tree, the guy stripped down to his underpants and turning to Kji asked, "Do you remember what I said?" The guy nodded. "Yes, to look after you and not let anyone in. If you scream, do not interfere and do not call for help." Hearing everything he needed, Shikamaru nodded curtly. "Okay, you can practice for now, I'll probably be stuck here for a long time." "Yeah." After finishing here, Shikamaru closed his eyes and mentally said, "Status. Name, Shikamaru Nara. Age, 4 years. Faction, Nara Clan, Hidden Leaf Village. Ninja rank, none. Strength, 31, Stamina, 37, Speed, 24. Talent, 80, Chakra size, 55, Chakra control, 27. Pedigree. Nara, Strength 425%, Improved Mastery of the Element Yin, 85%. Improved Genome, absent. Elements. Wind release 2%. Earth release 28%. Fire release 9%. Yin release 115%. Technique. Ninjutsu. Shadow binding technique, Haijutsu, Yin release. The statistics have changed a little, mainly the control has grown, but I think this is due to the clearing of the chakra channels. Although, I'm not exactly sure. Remembering the current statistics, Shikamaru was finally ready to spend points of fate. Having opened the exchange point, bloodlines and genomes, he focused his attention on the first of the chosen ones. Since he had already decided to buy Hyuga and Kaguya, he did not hesitate and chose the most difficult to bear in his opinion. Still, Shikatsumiyaku should have completely rebuilt the body and probably the pain from it will be many times worse. He wanted to endure it first, and only then begin to accept the pedigree from Dojutsu. As soon as he selected Kaguya's bloodline, 20,000 points were instantly debited from his account. But, at the same time, the strength of the boy's fate was slightly strengthened. Deep inside his body a dim red light acquired a slight radiance. It was barely noticeable, but even so, Shikamaru slowly began to make progress. His fate was strengthened. As soon as this happened, this dormant glow suddenly took effect, slowly spreading throughout Shikamaru's body. At the same time, he began to feel heat, which gradually began to develop into pain. Watching from Kji's side tensed as he noticed his friend's painful expression. Shikamaru began to sweat profusely and his skin began to behave strangely. The veins beneath his skin began to wriggle like worms. Even from a great distance, Kji felt something strange, something inexplicable. His friend changed before his eyes and at some point, even his skin began to move, followed by a terrible crackle of bones. From this sight Kji began to feel cloudy, all the pores on Shikamaru's skin began to bleed, even 2 bloody rivulets flowed out of his tightly closed eyes. Shikamaru seemed to be decomposing before our eyes. Covering his mouth with his hand, Kji turned away and tried to distract himself by looking at the quietly running river, and try to listen to the ringing birdsong. But, he did it badly. The crackling of bones and the quiet moaning of his friend became louder and louder. At some point, Shikamaru couldn't stand it anymore and started screaming terribly. This terrible and eerie scream frightened the little fat man even more. He closed his ears and shrank. But he still stayed and continued to wait. He could not leave his friend. Enough, enough. Everything will be fine with him. Mentally calming himself, Kji closed his eyes and continued to wait. Shikamaru's screams did not last long. At first they were loud, but then the guy was completely hoarse and his voice began to disappear, turning into the growl of a dying beast. Kji couldn't see what was happening, but Shikamaru felt it all on himself. It was terrifying. He could no longer sit. Clutching the ground with his fingers, he continued to scream painfully. Vision became terribly blurry, and a bloody veil covered his gaze. He saw with his own eyes how his skin literally peeled off his hands, exposing muscles and bones. Muscles moved, and bones all over the body seemed to be grinding. Receiving the Shikatsumiyaku really turned out to be monstrously painful. 20 minutes later, the screams died down and Kji finally removed his hands and breathed out in relief. Hua, finally, Shikamaru, you are so fond of me. But as soon as Kji turned around and saw what was left of his friend, his eyes shook in horror and unable to bear the sight, he instantly lost consciousness. Shikamaru was not at the same time. A strange force within him kept him alive and altered his lineage at the genetic level. But this power was not omnipotent, it could not relieve him of pain or bring him back to life. That is why, one wrong step and Shikamaru will die forever. There will be no more second chance, no more reincarnation. Relying on the system for this was a very big mistake. No matter how many points he spent or earned, no matter how the system changes in the future, everything will always depend on Shikamaru. Anyway, 10 hours later, as night was approaching and the sun was setting over the horizon, Shikamaru finally awakened from the worst dream of his life. The pain of receiving this bloodline will be remembered forever. At this time, Kji woke up a long time ago and still sat by the river. He was still trying to digest what he saw. Although he brought several packets of chips with him, he never touched any of them. After a recent spectacle, after seeing a mess of blood and flesh, the guy suffered a mental trauma. From all this, the innocent little boy seemed to have matured for several years. If Shikamaru had known it would turn out like this, he probably wouldn't have invited him today. Even he wouldn't want to show that to a child. He himself was not happy about many things he saw in his childhood, so he understood what it was. Unfortunately, now he did not know how Kji felt, and he did not even think about it. He was more interested in his own state, which was slightly unpleasant. Slowly standing up and brushing a few bits of something slimy from his eyes, Shikamaru grimaced and stuck out his tongue. Bhe! How disgusting! Kji suddenly flinched and turned sharply. Shikamaru! Oh! But just looking at his friend, he immediately turned around and began to empty the remains of his stomach. Pui! He, call me, it's not easier for me myself. Holding back gagging, Shikamaru slightly shook his arms and legs, and then ran away and rushed into the river. Jahoo! Asterisk splash! Asterisk. Washing off pieces of flesh from himself, each time Shikamaru grimaced and swam away from his past place, quickly trying to get rid of all the shed skin. After about 10 minutes, it was finally over. Crawling ashore, Shikamaru could finally breathe a sigh of relief. Brugga! Shuddering all over, Shikamaru grimaced at the river and muttered. Well, horror! This system will finish me one day. After standing on the shore for a while, Shikamaru listened to the bird song and the quietly babbling river. Sunset was approaching, and the rays of the setting sun were reflected from the quietly running water. The clear and refreshing scent of the forest was amazing, so Shikamaru decided to enjoy this atmosphere. With his changes, he began to experience the world in a different way, even his chakra. Enjoying the clean air, the guy breathed in his full chest and stretched his whole body. How nice. This world is amazing. Glancing at Kji's grim face with a smile, Shikamaru took a couple of steps towards his friend and asked. Hey, buddy, what's wrong with you? The guy raised his tired eyes and said. Shikamaru, can I go home already? Well. I think you really should rest, you don't look good. Bruises under the eyes and a gloomy expression on his face spoke of not the most pleasant day in the life of this child. He even seemed to lose weight. Shikamaru, of course, had no intention of keeping him here any longer. Thank you. The fat man held out and slowly stomped out of the forest. Shikamaru watched slowly as his friend left, and then shouted to him. Hey, Kji, you forgot the chips. The guy just waved his hand and quickened his pace. Looks like I shouldn't have called him, poor fellow. I can imagine what he saw, especially when my skin began to peel off. Smiling a little, Shikamaru walked over and opened a packet of chips. Well, I survived it, so it's not so bad. I hope I haven't spoiled my new friend's psyche. With a slight grin, Shikamaru stretched out his hand and focused chakra on his bones. He already instinctively understood how his new ability worked, so he immediately tried to interact with calcium using the chakra. As soon as he did that, a small, sharp bone instantly came out of Shikamaru's hand. Grimacing slightly at the unpleasant sensation of skin exfoliation, Shikamaru continued the process. ****. After a couple of seconds, a sharp and strong bone finally appeared. A few drops of blood spilled onto Shikamaru's lap, making him mildly surprised. Only now did he begin to realize how everything works. At the base of the bone, there was torn skin, but at the same time, it did not hurt, and bled quite a bit. Shikamaru touched the white and slightly damp bone and slowly pulled it out of his forearm. *****. As soon as the bone was extended, the skin instantly began to heal. It was not healing, as it might seem, but rather a refusion, as if the doors releasing the bones were closing. This was part of the ability of this genome. Yet the regeneration of the owner of Shikatsumiyaku was almost exactly the same as everyone else's. Moreover, during bone growth, the muscles also exfoliated and then fused again. Simply put, the body has completely changed specifically for the bones to grow outward. Twisting the sharp bone, Shikamaru nodded in satisfaction and rested the tip to his palm. After rubbing a little over the hand, blood quickly began to drip from it. It's clear as I thought, the guy nodded in satisfaction and put the bone aside. Regeneration has remained at the same level, so do not confuse fast healing with special separation. Although in both situations, Shikamaru lost blood, but with a stratification, everything could just as quickly return to its place. The body of the owner of the genome was special, there was no doubt about it. Shikamaru spent quite a bit of chakra to create this bone, which was undoubtedly pleasing. He was sure that it would not be difficult to create several dozen more of these. Apparently, the stronger the bone, the more chakra is consumed when interacting with calcium. After a little practice, Shikamaru quickly got used to the sensations. It was rather unpleasant, but it is quite possible to adapt. Still, the flesh didn't tear, so the pain wasn't as severe as one might think. This was expected, yet if Shikatsumiyaku had such an ailment as terrifying pain, there would be little sense in the ability. Whatever endurance a Shinobi possesses, not everyone could endure the constant tearing of flesh. So the pain threshold was not lowered, the body was still similar to an ordinary human, rather its structure was slightly different internally. The nerves were stratified, so the pain was minimal. Okay, I'll practice later. What's there on assignments? After giving the command, a window with recently completed tasks appeared in front of Shikamaru's eyes. Completed. New pedigree. Obtain the first non-congenital bloodline. Reward, 10,000 points, a special elixir and a special pill. Blood restriction. Get your first superior genome. Reward, 20,000 points, a scroll of forbidden S-class technique, a pill of purification of chakra channels. Another story. Purpose. Perform an action that completely changes the original story. Reward, 5,000 points, chakra storage expansion pill. Unexpectedly, there were 3 completed tasks instead of the expected 2. From the very beginning, Shikamaru did not understand what it meant. Take an action that completely changes the original story. Therefore, he was not sure how to complete this task or how to begin it at all. It seemed to him that he needed to do something special, like killing the main characters. It turned out that you need to do something like this. Not bad, probably until this time, although I was an anomaly, but not so strong. But having acquired Shikatsumiyaku, it completely changed everything. Chuckling, Shikamaru was even more delighted when he saw the chakra storage expansion pills. Its price was rather high, so getting it was a great gift. Especially now that he received new power, and even had a shadow clone scroll. Great, it's time to harvest. Smiling, Shikamaru immediately decided to collect the rewards he had earned. The sun was going down, so the Hyuga won't be able to get it today, but the rewards are quite possible. Even a pill may take time. 10,000 points, special elixir of element enhancement and bloodline enhancement pill. 20,000 points, a scroll of forbidden S-class technique, a pill of purification of chakra channels. 5,000 points, chakra storage expansion pill. Unfortunately, there were no hidden awards, but it was not necessary. Shikamaru did not take them into account, so the plan to obtain the next bloodline was in effect. Moreover, he completed another assignment, so he was already glad of it. All he was interested in right now was the new technique and the elixir pills. As soon as Shikamaru took the awards, the number of points instantly increased, and then the information about the new technique entered the guy's head. Living Puppet S-Rank Kinjutsu. When Shikamaru completely digested the information, he let out a long breath. And why do I need this? Where do I even use it? Reaching out to retrieve the pills and elixir, Shikamaru muttered, although it might work someday, it's still S-rank. The living puppet technique was quite complex and required a lot of chakra from the wearer. It made it possible to control a person, but under special conditions, which were the disadvantages of technology. But she received S-rank and the status of prohibited for a reason. The point is that it took a sacrifice to use it. This jutsu made it possible to control a person, not just with the help of threads, as ordinary puppets are controlled, but at a more complex level, forcing the victim to obediently obey any order. It worked as follows: the person needed for the technique must first be caught, then use several fuin seals on him and work on his brain using the technique. Then, you need to use a human sacrifice with a sufficient level of strength. This directly depends on the chance of success. This was the drawback, because to control the strong sacrifices are also needed. Further, it was required to attach the seals to the victims, and kill them, using their lives to enhance the technique. In the process, the user of the technique must establish a connection with the seals through the chakra threads, as well as with the subject's brain. Then everything is simple: complete the technique and establish full control. Further, if everything goes well, the user of the technology will not just establish control over the person, he literally will become its owner. The one on whom the technique was applied will no longer be a person, but just a servant. It was also interesting that the only way to dispel the technique was to completely pull out all the chakra threads from the brain and deactivate the fuin seals of the living puppet subject. But, as soon as this happens, the person will die immediately, since the threads literally entwine all the important parts of the brain. The technique can be called very scary, but it is not easy to use it. Against strong Shinobi it is almost useless, since it is too difficult to find an appropriate living victim. The ritual also takes time and a lot of chakra, along with surgical control. Even so, this jutsu is very powerful. After all, the victim, in fact, will become a personal slave and will be ready to carry out any order without question. In espionage and sabotage, this technique may well be called one of the best. Fuin seals will allow you to transmit orders over a distance to the victim's mind, if required, and easily receive a response. Moreover, the victim will not only follow orders, she will be happy doing it. She will become like a fanatical believer, ready to do anything for her master. Of course, it is unlikely that they will use it in peacetime, and even if they do, it will only be bandits or apostates. And it will not be easy to find someone capable of applying it. Good control and skill in fuin is not a frequent occurrence. Shikamaru was not particularly impressed. At the moment this technique was completely useless for him. Although, in the future it is quite possible that there will be a place for her. As Shikamaru extended his hand, the pills slowly began to appear one after the other, forming from glowing energy. Seeing this more than once, Shikamaru completely stopped being surprised. There were 2 pills in total, right after the elixir. The last appeared, the third, and probably the most expensive of all. She was slightly smaller than the others and completely black in color. The elixir had exactly the same shape as all the previous ones that Shikamaru took in the past, except that its color was different. The liquid inside the bottle was dark purple and rather cloudy. Smiling with satisfaction, Shikamaru went back to his clothes and put all the medicines in different pockets. The pills could be confused, so he tried to keep them away from each other. Glancing at the sun that was almost completely hidden behind the horizon, Shikamaru nodded and quickly dressed. Although he had a desire to take the elixir, he decided to refrain from this until tomorrow, and possibly even longer. He felt a little tired, so he wanted to rest and take them later, maybe in a few days. Okay, get the Bakugan tomorrow, and then you can start long and tedious training. Smiling, Shikamaru slowly went home, enjoying a calm walk through the forest. The next day, Shikamaru returned to the forest again. This time without Kji. Probably the little guy is still trying to digest yesterday. Shikamaru was not particularly worried about this, so he decided to go to the forest alone. When he finished training, he quickly set about buying the next pedigree. He did not want to waste time as he had a family dinner in the evening. Therefore, it was worth hurrying up and being in time by sunset, to figure everything out. After recently completed tasks, Shikamaru already had 50,000 points on his account. Quite a significant number when you consider that the Uchiha bloodline was worth 50,000. Shikamaru was embarrassed. This time it didn't go according to plan again. This system was so unpredictable that even it bothered him a little. He had already planned to receive the Bakugan, but only now realized that he was quite capable of receiving the Sharingan. Yesterday he just fell asleep and did not even attach importance to the additional points of fate, but now. Stop, let me think. Sitting down by the river, Shikamaru decided to slightly reconsider his plans. Due to these changes, it was definitely necessary. For starters, he looked at the new assignment. With no restrictions. Obtain 5 improved genomes. And right after that, on all the old ones, trying to make some plans. Now, possessing 50,000 points of fate, he could quite easily return 10,000 and not be left with nothing. The Sharingan was terribly seductive. As much as Shikamaru liked the Uchiha because of their cheating eyes, he had to admit that those eyes are very powerful. Although, if we talk about cheating, then definitely not Shikamaru, he definitely beats them. The problem with those eyes was that once purchased, Shikamaru would not have the Sharingan, unlike buying the Hyuga bloodline, where he would have received the Bakugan. So it was said, the Sharingan is there, but it is not awakened. Shikamaru had already studied the pills, so finding one that would help awaken the Sharingan was not difficult. Even though the price was 5,000, he didn't care much. Still, spending points was actually easier than setting up a situation in which the eyes themselves activate. It was almost impossible to create a situation artificially, and he was not used to hoping for luck. Waste time waiting was not an option either. With all this, after receiving the award for the first dojutsu, Shikamaru will already have to spend 55,000, and he will have 5,000 in his hands. If you translate them into useful pills, then this is just 2 pills for strengthening the pedigree. In principle, everything is not so bad. In a year he will be able to earn 3 more pills. Yes, and with Shikatsu Myaku, it will not be difficult to train the Sharingan to at least 2 tomo. Also, one should not forget that the Sharingan was not inferior to the Bakugan in its 3 tomoya version, and in some ways even superior. And for Taijutsu, it will be more useful, because copying movement and improved reaction, this is an incredible ability of the Uchiha eyes, just what the Hyuga eyes do not have. For those eyes, only the Tanketsu attack style works and there isn't much variety. In addition, if you think a little, you can understand that the Uchiha's brain works much better than that of other Shinobi. After all, how can a simple brain process so much information and memorize techniques? The eyes were a tool, but without the powerful capabilities of the brain, this would not have been possible. Of course, the Hyuga had a special chakra circulation system, and unlike other Shinobi, they are able to emit chakra from all Tanketsu. But, the Bakugan had a significant drawback, in the form of a stupor in development. Still, reaching Tensogun is almost a myth. In addition, the Uchiha clan will soon die out, there will be definitely fewer problems with them than with the Hyuga. And the risk that the eyes will stand out, as can happen with the Bakugan, is minimal, and this is an additional plus for safety. Although, in fact, for the current Shikamaru, both eyes are approximately equal. He did not even look at Mangeki as it was pointless. But if you look into the future, taking red eyes was a little wiser. All that remains afterwards is to buy another pill and awaken Mangeki, and with the Bakugan, this will not work. But seeing some of the details in this quickly calculated plan, Shikamaru chuckled wryly. It's not that simple. The task clearly states, awaken the dojutsu, and not get the pedigree with it. The gist of this was simple. Shikamaru simply will not receive the 10,000 points he counted on for the task of obtaining the dojutsu, which means that not only will he not be able to awaken the Sharingan, but he will also not be able to buy pills. Roughly speaking, all he will have is 0 fate points and 2 pedigrees, not counting his innate nature. Looking at this from this side, and the choice of Bakugan was many times more profitable. Shikamaru could still buy the Hyuga bloodline and save 10,000, while returning another 10,000 for the task. This is quite a significant number, especially when you consider that the Uzumaki bloodline can be easily acquired for this amount. The first option will give a good pedigree, without dojutsu, and the second option will give both, and even extra points. The situation was interesting. Unfortunately, if the second option is chosen, it will not be very useful. Firstly, he cannot improve these pedigrees, and secondly, there will be little benefit from a large number at the moment. You need to at least deal with one, and only then make plans for others. Although, you could have chosen the second option, without buying Uzumaki, and then everything would have been a little better. But, Shikamaru still doubted a little. After all, the chance to get the Sharingan is very tempting. Of course, having received it, Shikamaru will have difficulties with the next bloodline. With Uzumaki, you will have to wait a long time. Yes, and you will need to get 5,000 for the awakening of dojutsu, and then it will be wasted on strengthening the bloodlines. After thinking a bit about the situation, Shikamaru made a new plan, returning to several tasks. To achieve the power of genin, learn techniques, live a year, graduate from the academy. Not bad. What about the elements? There were a lot of tasks. In principle, in a year, getting 5,000 is quite realistic. This time can also be shortened if you are lucky. With just that, Shikamaru made up his mind. The Sharingan was not cancelled, its evolutionary opportunity was well worth it, even if it was not awakened. His respect for the Bakugan could not influence this decision. Having X-ray vision was the dream of many men, but Shikamaru was ready to temporarily give up this, albeit with some difficulties. The eyes of the Uchiha were more preferable to him, and thanks to the bonus from the bloodline, Shikamaru could come close to the next task, with a reward of 15,000 points. Even if it took longer, it was worth it. It was stupid to miss such a chance. The affinity with the elements could give a lot, just what the Hyuga did not have. For this it was worth doing something and probably getting another weak bloodline. In the future, he will spend on everything, about 10,000, and return 15 and at the same time get a new strong element. Well, and there it is, a stone's throw to Uzumaki, a couple of small tasks for techniques and everything will be ready. With a good result, this may not be necessary. It was pointless to build long plans, anything can change with this system. Today he was convinced of this from his own experience. The plan was not difficult, rather it could be influenced by various uncertainties, as in the current situation. Hidden rewards were one of those. With a long exhale, Shikamaru finally made up his mind and without hesitation spent 50,000 points immediately on the Uchiha bloodline. Well, I hope it's for the best. There is a possibility that after the first dojutsu, there may be tasks for 2 or 3 others at once. But it's not worth the risk, I will choose the Sharingan in any case. The risk might have paid off, but this time Shikamaru had no intention of doing so. Although he did not lose anything, he was in no hurry to go anywhere. Greed can lead to problems, it is worth knowing when to stop. He already got a lot of luck, so it was not worth the risk. Okay, I've already sat too long, I just do what I sit and buy new powers. It looks strange, but I have such an unbalanced system. I bought one, got an award, a little cheating as for me. Although, this is in my hands, so I'm even glad. Everything has dragged on too long, so I will try to be without the system for the next year or a little more. Then look at the circumstances. As soon as the 50,000 points were spent, the strange energy in Shikamaru's body began to move. The guy's score instantly cleared, but no matter how strange it may seem, the luminous energy became a little brighter. As soon as Shikamaru finished his words, the force of fate almost completely enveloped the boy's body, and came close to the brain. This was different from the last time, where the energy was mostly concentrated in the bones. This time it was just the brain. Here the glowing crimson glow was the brightest and most concentrated. Within seconds, the force began to burn his eyes, causing Shikamaru to grimace and clench his fists. He was already prepared for the pain and assumed that this time his eyes would hurt more than usual. But he could not retreat, for the sake of the Sharingan, a little pain was a trifle. Unfortunately, there was no question of a little pain. While Shikamaru was in tremendous pain from slowly tearing eyes and a changing brain, the Hidden Leaf village was calm and serene as always. White clouds slowly floated across the sky and gradually drifted away into distant distances. The pure scent of nature and a fresh breeze lifted the spirits of only awakened residents, and the view of an ever-rising rock with the faces of the Hokage gave a feeling of security and confidence in the future. Especially in recent years, when there were no wars. It was even quieter here than before. Shinobi went on missions, and ordinary residents were engaged in their usual daily routine. No one even could have imagined that right in the forest of the village, very soon a new owner of the legendary eyes would appear. The man who will completely change this village. All these days Shikamaru studied a lot, but he did not have time to get close to the important characters in the original story. He did not even suspect that this world had some differences from the one he knew about. Knowledge, history, everything that wasn't even mentioned in the manga was created here. This world was real, with its own rules and a long history. There were those in Konoha that Shikamaru had not yet met or specifically avoided meeting them. Some of these were the Uchiha Sasuke and the nine-tailed fox's little Jinchuriki Naruto Uzumaki. Although Shikamaru managed to visit the Uzumaki quarter enclosed by an impenetrable barrier, he decided not to see Naruto himself yet. Uchiha Sasuke was still quite a child and rarely left the territory of his own clan. The boy has not yet experienced the pain of loss, has not awakened his Sharingan. He did not even suspect that the end of his clan was near, and that one of the people closest to him would be one of the main people involved in this. On the other hand, Shikamaru also didn't bother much meeting with the rest of whom he knew quite a lot. He decided to wait until the academy itself, and then figure it out. After all, they were all still quite children. Many of them don't even know about each other. Ino didn't know Sakura, Lee didn't know Neji and Tenten, and Naruto didn't even know that one day he would make many friends. The little Jinchuriki had to leave the orphanage very soon, and very soon his new life would begin. But unfortunately she too, for some time will be filled with loneliness. Shikamaru thought about this more than once. He did not regret Naruto, rather was surprised by the strange actions of the third Hokage, or rather, inaction. The old man promised to take care of him, but in the end he left him alone. All would be fine, but Shikamaru was sure that Naruto's legacy was not a pathetic benefit received from Raizeenn. Even the sealed district of Uzumaki, there must have been something left. In the end, Shikamaru could only be disappointed with this old man and just not pay attention. At the same time, on the top floor of the Hokage residence, the main office, in which the head of the village was located, was quite spacious and a little empty. There was a large table at which Raizeenn worked and several books on it. The entire room was lit by a couple of candles on the table and a small chandelier on the ceiling. Raizeenn usually closed the windows and did not let daylight into the room. He liked to work in the twilight, in a calm and quiet environment. On one of the walls hung several portraits of the previous Hokage, which the third sometimes glanced at. In one corner of the room, several books and scrolls were scattered. Otherwise, the office was almost empty. At a large table, with the symbol of the List village, sat a small old man wearing a Hokage hat, on which a red kanji, fire, was depicted. Raizeenn grimly read the recent report on the events in the Sand Village and the situation with the one-tailed Jinchuriki. The situation with all the Baijua bearers was very important, so every Kage had to be very clear about them. So this is how. Race, was it really worth it? Poor boy. It was no secret how the Jinchuriki were treated. But the way Gaara was treated as a child was quite ruthless. Raizeenn could only sigh at the boy's fate. Even as Hokage, Raizeenn himself could not control some things. Even giving Naruto the name of the already extinct Uzumaki clan, he could not change much. He understood that even the Uzumaki surname could cause problems for the child. But after the disappearance of this clan, possessing this surname was no longer so dangerous. At least Naruto got at least something from his parents. Moreover, it was impossible to hide the fact that the boy was a Jinchuriki. Now, Naruto has a difficult life ahead of him. Raizeenn himself could not take care of him, as much as he wanted to, but it was impossible. He didn't even see his own grandson every day. This kind of inaction and thought was very characteristic of the third Hokage. So it was pointless to argue and talk about it. He was famous for his inaction on many issues. Both Dans and the Jinchuriki are an orphan. He did everything he could. Looking at Minato's portrait, Raizeenn could only sigh. I hope everything will be all right. Just at that moment, there was a knock on the Hokage's office. Come in. Raizeenn went back to his papers, and a dark-haired man with a couple of visible scars on his face entered the room. Raising his tired look a little, Raizeenn calmly asked. What is Shikaku? Hokage-sama, we ended up in Kiri. Okay, put the report on the table. Shikaku slowly put down the scroll, and then, bowing respectfully with a calm step, began to leave. Wait. Shikaku, I heard about your son, how is he? Shikaku smiled slightly and nodded. It's okay Hokage-sama, it looks like the situation even went to his advantage, he began to train and is making great strides. But, I rarely see him, so I don't know much. I understand. Lighting his pipe, Raizeenn got up from his chair and crunching his back a little, walked to the window and slowly opened it. When the sun's rays crept into the office, Raizeenn smiled warmly and said, the new generation is growing, and many talents will surely appear among them. Turning to Shikaku, Raizeenn said, regarding Kiri, leave it to the anew, I will send a detachment, and you go home for now, since your mission is over, rest a little. We will need your abilities soon. Is it because of the Uchiha? Shikaku asked gloomily. Raizeenn smiled wryly. There have been many problems with them in recent years. But I hope things don't get worse. With a sigh, Raizeenn sat down on a chair and nodded. Okay, I'll see you Shikaku again. Yes, the man nodded and quickly left the office. Already outside the door, he muttered softly. I hope you are right. Shaking his head, the man slowly went home. The mission to gather information in Kiri was quite long, he had not seen his wife and son for a long time. At the same time, when the sun was approaching its sunset, In the Nara clan forest, Shikamaru finally began to recover. The guy was lying next to a tree, and a brown deer calmly nibbled grass near his head. At some point, Shikamaru's hand began to twitch. The animal immediately noticed his movements. Just at the same moment, Shikamaru jumped up. Ha! From this loud sigh, the deer trembled and rushed frightened into the forest. In the same second, Shikamaru's gaze instantly moved to the fleeing figure. But as soon as that happened, Shikamaru suddenly grimaced. "Are you? How bright!" The new eyes were very sensitive. The vision was so sharp that it was difficult to concentrate. The light burned, from which the eyes began to water. Slowly rubbing them, Shikamaru tried to adapt to the light. This time, the guy's body changed, but these changes were different from those that occurred due to the bloodline of the Kaguya clan. This time, the skin was mostly not flaking, rather a lot of different fluids flowed out of Shikamaru, mainly from the head and eyes. Changing, the body gains something, but also spends energy for this and at the same time loses something. The system worked in such an unusual way. Shikamaru was already used to this, so using his ear, he slowly walked to the river and began to wash. At some point, he was finally able to see normally. True, this normal was different from his expectations. Even normal vision, without the Sharingan, was very sharp. In the past, Shikamaru had good eyesight, but now she has become several times better. It was amazing. Of course, having received this bloodline, he wondered if he could be considered an Uchiha. Probably, his purity and bloodline strength is an order of magnitude superior to the current Uchiha, and after taking the pills, it is even possible to compare with the strength of Indra's bloodline. Although, of course, one should not forget that Indra is a direct descendant of Kaguya's son, so he may be a pureblood Uchiha, but also related to Zatsuki. So all Uchiha to some extent have distant genes of the divine clan, but in the case of Shikamaru, this may not be the case. Although, it was difficult to talk about it. The system was rather incomprehensible in this regard. In any case, purity was of little use, it all depended on strength. But strength did not give as many advantages as it might seem. The same Sharingan did not depend on the strength of the Uchiha bloodline. Even the system didn't say that. All that the Uchiha blood gave was good compatibility with the fire element and the unique structure of the brain. But only compatibility with fire depended on the strength of the genealogy, the rest could not be strengthened. So by raising the power of the bloodline, Shikamaru will not be able to enhance his eye techniques, no matter how much he wants to. Of course, that would be too much. He has already received many benefits. After rinsing in the river, Shikamaru quickly changed his clothes and brushed his wet hair aside. The big hair was a bit uncomfortable, so the guy was planning to get rid of it somehow. Usually he was not used to long hair, but leaving a little was possible. Of course, not the same as now. Okay, I'll deal with them later. After combing them back, Shikamaru quickly sat down by a tree and mentally said with anticipation. Status. He was already eager to look at the results of his labors, even after receiving the Kaguya clan's bloodline. He did not look at the status, deliberately delaying this moment. He was just sure the next status review should surprise him. Name, Shikamaru Nara. Age, 4 years. Faction, Nara clan, Hidden Leaf Village. Ninja rank, none. Strength, 73, Stamina, 85, Speed, 57. Talent, 150, Chakra size, 105, Chakra control, 34. Pedigree. Nara, strength 425%, improved mastery of the element yin, 85%. Improved genome, absent. Kaguya, 50% strength, unique body plus 5 to indicators, strength, endurance and speed. Improved genome, Shikatsu. Evolution, absent. Uchiha, strength 50%, improved mastery of the element fire, 10%. Improved genome, Sharingan, not activated. Elements. Wind release 2%. Earth release 30%. Fire release 25%. Yin release 115%. Yang release 8%. Technique. Ninjutsu. Shadow binding technique, Haijutsu, Yin release. Here, I understand that. Smiling at the markedly increased performance, Shikamaru was finally pleased. Of course, one cannot say that he achieved super results. In terms of chakra volume, he was definitely inferior to Genin, but even surpassed in endurance. As it was already known, the power of the pedigree did not extend to the genome, but only to the special indicator that the pedigree gave. For Nara, this is an improvement in the possession of the yin element, for the Uchiha the fire element, but for Kaguya, 3 indicators are amplified, for every 10% an additional point of 3 characteristics. Not bad enough, Shikamaru was already pretty close to Genin and completing the next assignment with a decent reward. Unfortunately, a few more indicators did not reach, and he also lacked several E-rank techniques. Thanks to all the transformations he underwent and the acquisition of Kaguya's bloodline, Shikamaru even had a bit of yang compatibility. Most recently, he realized something important about yin and yang compatibility. The main thing is that compatibility does not give any benefit in the accumulation of chakra. Simply put, even if he has acquired 100% compatibility with the yin element, the amount of his spiritual energy will not change at all. It will not even affect its accumulation or growth rate. So his first thoughts on this matter were wrong. Simply put, thanks to his improved yin skills, all his yin-based techniques will be stronger than normal ones. This is the only plus, that's all. In principle, this was reasonable, because if it also affected the amount of chakra, it would be too easy to develop. Training is mainly influenced by talent. Therefore, Shikamaru does not have that much chakra, because he hardly ever trained. Only thanks to the experienced difficulties in gaining strength, he raised his reserves quite a bit. But this is of course sheer trifles, even Genin has 2 times more chakras. Except for monsters like the Jinchuriki, of course. Regarding the elements, he was a little difficult to understand here, but Shikamaru, in principle, began to understand this after reading a couple of books about chakra. Well, memories also helped. The same Madara, for example, had such a strong element of fire that he could easily withstand the water techniques of dozens of Shinobi of the Alliance, and this despite the fact that water by nature suppresses the flame. This speaks of the power of the elements. If a Shinobi has greater elemental compatibility, this affects his transformation and the power of elemental techniques. By using it even against what is naturally stronger, the one who is capable of the stronger transformation wins. The wind may intensify the flame, but a really strong wind is quite capable of extinguishing it. Of course, here the chakra also played a role, without this, of course, nowhere. But even a bunch of chakra won't save you from Madara's good fireball. So the improved mastery of the elements directly affects the strength of the elements and everything, and those, in turn, on the techniques using these elements. That is why improved possession of Yin Shikamaru did not affect the amount of spiritual energy, because in fact, it influenced precisely its strength, that's all. The improvements in conversion percentages weren't the only thing that changed. 2 new genomes were also noteworthy. As in the description, they had 50% strength from the beginning. That was already quite worthy and gave good bonuses. Even if the Sharingan was not awakened, Shikamaru was not worried. With his current talent for increasing chakra and learning E-rank techniques, it won't be difficult. Even if it doesn't work out, after a year he will still complete one task, so 5,000 points is just a matter of time. His current strength has grown quite well without training, but of course, one cannot say that he is really any special. In principle, the same Kakashi was probably stronger than him at a similar age, at 6, for sure. It may seem like Shikamaru is just sitting and buying power, but in reality, he is preparing the foundations for future development. Now having 2 good bloodlines, he was quite ready to start hard training and no longer worry about the glasses of fate, at least temporarily. Any sane person entering another world with such a system would probably do so. After completing the status check, Shikamaru immediately went home. He won't be able to verify the Uchiha pedigree yet. Dojutsu has not yet been awakened, and he does not know the technique of fire. Though, remembering the techniques, Shikamaru unconsciously smiled. Perhaps, getting the Sharingan even in this situation was very useful. The Bakugan was still coveted, but the Sharingan was almost as good at learning new techniques as the system. Of course, something very rare cannot be copied, but something simple is quite real. Especially in the case of Shikamaru, if he gets more genomes, he can even copy special techniques. Even a meeting with Kimimuru can be very useful, yet now he also possesses the Shikatsu-myaku genome, and if Shikamaru understood everything correctly, then it will be quite possible to copy his techniques. Of course, the Sharingan was still worth learning and understanding some things. Anyway, to awaken him to begin with, but in this regard, Shikamaru had several ideas. The Uchiha massacre is coming soon, and this could be a good chance to get at least one, but the Sharingan and the brains of the Uchiha themselves would be good for research. Thinking about this, Shikamaru himself did not notice how he returned home, and when he heard his mother's displeased voice, he slightly smiled. Usually Yoshino is dissatisfied with only one person. Back then, Shikaku was on a mission, so Shikamaru didn't have a chance to learn a couple more techniques. Now it was possible. If his father doesn't teach him, he can at least give him a scroll. Shikamaru already had plans to learn how to walk in trees and on water. Well, of course, he did not forget about the cloning technique and other E-rank jutsu. Fortunately, all this could be found in the Konoha library. Simple techniques should be there. Back at home for dinner, Shikamaru greeted his parents with a smile and sat down at the table. After putting the plate to her son, Yoshino asked displeasedly, "Shikamaru, can you explain what you did in the forest until nightfall?" "Trained." Did you train? But what about the morning workout, wasn't it enough for you? I let you do the simple exercises after the hospital, but I didn't let you wear yourself out. What are you doing there?" After chewing on the rice, Shikamaru calmly replied, "I'm just throwing shurikens." The guy pulled out a couple of shurikens to prove it. "And where did you get them from?" the woman asked gloomily. "Who gave them to you?" "You and the father of the ninja. Where do you think I could take them?" Shikamaru asked calmly. He did not lie. In the house of any ninja you can find weapons, if of course you look. What Shikamaru enjoyed doing in his early days. Shikaku smiled slightly, but that could not hide from his wife's keen eyes. Why are you smiling? Your son is using a weapon, and you decided to smile. Maybe you can say something. Clearing his throat slightly, Shikaku turned to his son and said instructively. Shikamaru, put the shurikens back, I'll buy you my own. Yoshino's face changed dramatically. What did you say? But shouldn't he start training already? 4 years after all, at his age I was already studying at full length. You also studied. The woman snorted. Who do you want to deceive? But. Enough. Yoshino interrupted, then sighed, son, it's commendable that you want to get stronger. But think about your health, you just got out of the hospital, what if it hurts you? Shikamaru ate calmly all this time and was not particularly worried about the conversation. He smiled slightly at his mother's question and replied. Mom, I'm fine, it's just shuriken throws and chakra training. What kind of training? The woman asked seriously. Shikamaru scratched his chin slightly and replied. I read about chakra control in the library, so I'm trying to climb a tree. Oh. Practicing tree climbing, not bad. Any progress? Shikaku asked with interest, which made Yoshino look at her son with curiosity. Shikamaru shrugged. I do not know, I just started, and then something happened. What happened? The woman asked seriously. Well. Shikamaru feigned nervousness, and then asked, no one is spying on us. This is pretty important. Shikaku noticed his son's gaze and slowly looked around, then nodded. It seems like nobody. Okay. Shikamaru sighed and braced himself. He knew that sooner or later he had to show it. Once the chance presented itself, it was worth it now. Father and mother are unlikely to harm him, rather the opposite. So showing them that was the right choice to avoid unpleasant situations. Shikamaru has always considered trust to be an important part of relationships with people, but he just rarely came across someone he could trust. But the current situation was very simple, these two are his parents, trust in them should be natural. So Shikamaru did not hesitate and, stretching out his hand, began to perform chakra. As soon as the boy's skin stirred, Yoshino flinched slightly, and Shikaku began to watch the changes tensely. *SHHHKK*. The flesh on the hand instantly split and a sharp bone emerged from the hole. Shikaku widened his eyes in shock, and Yoshino covered her mouth with her hand and jumped up. Still, to see how his own son's flesh is torn, and then a bone crawls out of it, a rather unpleasant sight. Shikamaru only smiled a little, and then the bone slowly returned to its place. The skin grew back together, and the boy continued to eat rice. This, what is it? Yoshino asked in amazement, stepping back a little from the shock. Shikaku, on the other hand, was a little calmer, frowning his eyebrows and seriously asked. Shikamaru, how did it happen, where did you get it from? I'm not sure, I started falling from the tree, and tried to catch onto the branch, and then, a bone came out of my hand and I was able to stop the fall. Something like this. But. What is it? Shikaku, have you seen this already? This is bad. Yoshino asked, with a tinge of fear in her voice. The man shook his head slowly. I'm not sure if this is bad. Rather, it is simply impossible. As far as I know, what Shikamaru has now used is a unique ability inherent in rare members of one clan from the Land of Water. The Kaguya clan is famous for its special disposition and cruelty, and thanks to Shikamaru, they are known as one of the strongest in Taijutsu. But, I just can't imagine how he could get this ability. Seriously looking at his son, Shikaku asked. Shikamaru, what else was weird going on with you? The guy immediately shook his head. Nothing, only my eyes hurt a little, and my vision improved, otherwise everything is fine. I had bone pain from the hospital itself, but after what happened yesterday, when this power awakened, I began to feel just fine. After the words of his son, Shikaku began to think tensely. First the bones, and then the eyes. Maybe that's why he ended up in the hospital. Maybe it's some kind of rare genome of our clan. But then why have I never heard of him? This is strange. While Shikaku thought, Yoshino approached her son with concern and stroked his head. Sonny, now nothing hurts you. No mom, everything is fine, I just feel great, don't worry. Shikamaru laughed like a child and reassured the woman a little with his smile. Shikaku was not calm, he wanted to know the reasons. He wanted to understand why everything happened like this. I should probably do some tests. I think Anew-san will be able to hide some things from others. I would not want undesirable persons to know about this. Shikatsumiyaku plunged many into fear if Shikamaru learned how to use it. Nodding slightly to his thoughts, Shikaku internally decided, okay, it's worth checking if it's not dangerous. The members of the Kaguya clan were quite bloodthirsty, who knows why. Deciding to conduct several tests, Shikaku immediately told his wife and son about this. Although Yoshino was a little worried, she also understood that it was necessary. Shikamaru, of course, did not mind, he knew what would happen, so he was already ready for this in advance. Now that he had finally let his parents in on some of his secrets, he felt a little light. Now he was ready for long and hard training. There was still so much to study and so much to learn. After finishing dinner, Shikamaru went out into the backyard and breathed in the fresh evening air. Okay. With a slight smile, he looked at the stars. Now, he finally did everything that was needed, it remains only to train until the very academy. Let's see how everything goes. These 2 years should be interesting. Smiling slightly, Shikamaru relaxed. Just at that moment, the door opened and Shikaku appeared. Noticing the shogi board in his father's hands, Shikamaru immediately sat down and waited. This evening was very calm. Father and son talked slowly and moved the figures. 2 years later. Hidden Leaf Village, Shinobi Academy. Exactly 1 day has passed since the enrollment of the next batch of students. After a few years, some good candidates for becoming a ninja should appear among them. Today was the first day of school and many tried not to be late. When the whole class gathered in the audience, the children carefully looked at each other. Many of them were unfamiliar, but there were also those who had already made friends. Among the children, there were few who sat quietly and looked around, most just started getting to know each other until the teacher came to class. At the same time, a large guy in a grey sweatshirt and disheveled hair was sitting on the last row, quietly chewing chips. Kji looked at the crowd boredly and often glanced at the door. Where is he wearing it? He said that he would come. Rising from his seat, Kji slowly went down 2 desks forward and sat down next to a couple of children. By the window sat a blonde with a little unusual stripes on his face, a bit resembling a mustache, and next to him was a dark-haired guy with red marks on his cheeks. Sitting down next to him, Kji immediately started a conversation. Hi, I'm Kji Akimichi. Hi, I'm Kiba. Kiba in Yuzuka, and this. When both looked at the blonde, he smiled and said loudly, "I, Uzumaki Naruto. Oh, well, nice to meet you guys. Do you want chips?" Without waiting for an answer, Kji poured the last chips into his mouth and grinned. Well, who did not have time, he was late, he. The two immediately threw displeased glances at the fat man. Kiba, what's that on your face, and you have Kji too?" Uzumaki asked with interest. Kji ignored the question as Kiba began to explain. "Well, that's how it is with us, in my clan for example." While the guys talked, Kji continued to calmly inspect the class. Here's Ino," waving at the little blonde. She smiled and waved back, and then quickly began to inspect everything next to Kji. Not finding what she was looking for, the girl's eyes slightly saddened, but then she calmed down and continued to communicate with the girls. Kji continued to look around. He hardly knew anyone, but he had heard about some from his friend. That one with strange eyes must be Hinata Hyuga, and that pink-haired one must be Sakura. Continuing to look around, Kji muttered in displeasure. "Where he wears it, the teacher will come soon." Stopping at the curious character, Kji immediately realized who it was. Uchiha Sajuke. Shikamaru was right, I recognized him right away. A dark-haired boy with a pretty face, sat quietly on the first desk and hardly moved. The boy had a curious look, but he was not particularly sociable, so he sat quietly alone. In this he was perhaps not the only one. Although, of course, there were opposites. "I will become Hokage," Naruto yelled as he jumped out of his chair. "Fie, are you the one? Don't make me laugh. You should finish the academy first," Kiba snorted. Finish, do not hesitate." The abuse from the two gave Kji a headache. He was very much accustomed to quiet training and not particularly noisy company. Moreover, after spending 2 years with Shikamaru, Kji has noticeably changed not only externally, but also internally. Even at the age of 6, he already thought almost like a teenager, so the company of these kids amused him a little. While not all Shinobi children behave their own age, he most certainly did not think of as 6 years old. Most Shinobi are considered adults by the age of 12. Kji had heard about Naruto from Shikamaru, who had contact with this blonde, so he wanted to make sure what this guy was like. But it turned out that he is a rather loud type. Taking a breath, Kji continued to wait for his friend. Although they arrived at the academy together, Shikamaru was summoned for some reason to the director. Of course, Kji was not particularly worried. He knew for sure that this was not a problem for Shikamaru at all. Moreover, even in the academy, he does not need to study, with his abilities. Just then, the door to the auditorium slowly swung open. Many curious glances were instantly thrown at the newcomer. But, Kji just sighed and looked at the man with interest. Still, this is his first day, he was also a little nervous. A tall young man with a noticeable scar on his face entered the office, which horizontally crossed his nose. He wore a standard knin vest and wore a village protector on his forehead. Walking into the middle of the office, Iruka stopped and looked around the classroom, put his hands behind his back and said loudly, "Greetings, I'm your homeroom teacher, Yumino Iruka. Now I will tell you your names and we will get to know each other." With a slight smile, the man lifted the magazine and began to take turns calling the names of the students. At the same time, in another part of the academy, in a small office, at a wooden table, several people were sitting and discussing something. At the head of the table sat Raizeenn, and next to him was a small old man in a Panama hat. This old man has been the director of the Shinobi Academy almost since its inception. But his age made itself felt. He was even older than the third Hokage. In front of the two sat two, a short dark-haired guy and a man with a couple of scars on his face. Over the past 2 years, Shikaku has not changed much, but Shikamaru has grown a little and became a little larger. 2 years of hard training hardened his body and he no longer looked like an ordinary skinny child. He was wearing the same dark shirt with a couple of open buttons on the top and black breeches. The only thing that has changed is his shoes and bandages on his hands to the elbows. The arms and legs were bandaged, but it was noticeable that the bandages were slightly thicker than they should be. Of course, there was a reason for this too. Also, Shikamaru was now cut short and got rid of the typical Nara clan tail. Although his hair remained quite sharp. Right now, the four were discussing exactly Shikamaru's situation. So, with a little cough, Director Tenzu handed a small sheet of paper to the Hokage and said, "I don't think this will be news to you, Hokage-sama." The old man nodded and began to read. "Heh, you're right, it was expected." He answered all the questions in less than 5 minutes and, apparently, this is the highest result. Tenzu smiled slightly and said, "It's so easy to pass the graduation test at this age, this child is really a genius. If you hadn't warned the Hokage-sama, I wouldn't have believed it." Finished before even introducing, Shinobi like that appear very rarely. Shikamaru sat to the side smiling slightly, while Shikaku grinned proudly. Raizeenn looked at the results a little more, and then put the sheet aside. Okay, all this was so clear. Shifting his calm gaze to the young man in front of him, Raizeenn calmly asked, "Shikamaru, what have you decided? I've already seen your skills, I'm afraid you have nothing to learn at the academy." Shikamaru had already expected a similar question. The Hokage knew enough to understand his abilities. Shikamaru's secret was impossible to hide, so the Hokage was one of those who needed to know about him. As much as he wanted to, but in some matters, he had to reveal some of his secrets. The choice was pretty simple, either Dun's side or the Hokage. Hiding certain information can lead to unpleasant consequences. For Shikamaru, it was still easier, with his secrets he could choose, though not particularly reliable, but more or less stable side. Raizeenn was the best fit for this. But, the Hokage knew about the guy's abilities for another reason, it just so happened that Shikamaru showed him his abilities. 2 months ago. Hokage residence. When the sun was already going down, Raizeenn, as usual, continued to sit for papers and work. After losing his wife, he began to spend much more time at work than in the past. Of course, sometimes, when the old man had free time, he tried to spend it with his grandson, and if possible, visit Naruto at least once a month. Just when Raizeenn was about to take another report, there was a knock on his door. He raised his tired gaze and calmly said, "Come in." A masked man entered the office and quickly said, "Hokage-sama, here for you." In general, the child named himself Shikamaru Nara. The Hokage's eyebrow arched and he asked in surprise, "Shikamaru? Shikaku's son?" At the ninja's brief nod, the Hokage scratched his beard in surprise and waved his hand. "Then let him come." Millimeter. Nodding, the man closed the door and left. After about a couple of seconds, there was another knock on the door, and then a short guy entered the office. When Shikamaru entered, his gaze quickly swept across the office, and after a second stopped at Raizeen's surprised gaze. Was it just me, or did he check the surroundings? What a curious young man. Smiling slightly, the Hokage asked. What brings you to me, boy? Shikaku sent you. No. Actually, I wanted to talk about something. Yes. And what is it about? Hiruzen looked at the guy with interest and waited. The look of this child surprised the old man a little, but remembering Shikaku as a child, he calmed down a bit. Still, geniuses sometimes grow up early. Shikamaru, on the other hand, made some conclusions. Not bad, so this is what the village chief's office looks like, interesting. The old man doesn't even seem dangerous, and you can't say that he is an experienced shinobi. Although a sly and calm look is quite remarkable. When Hiruzen asked the question, Shikamaru smiled slightly and replied. You've already heard about my special powers. Are you talking about Shikatsu-myaku? Yes. At a nod from Shikamaru, Hiruzen quickly replied. I heard. I think when you become a ninja it will be good for the village. This ability is truly terrifying. Of course, I also hope that Shikaku has already told you to show it as little as possible. Still, rare things often cause envy, and sadly, in our village too. Hiruzen sighed. Shikamaru nodded. I understand, but I'm here to show you something else. More. Hiruzen's face changed sharply and seriously asked. Have you got something else? Yes, but I would like to show it to you during our sparring. Do you mind? When Shikamaru asked this question, Hiruzen laughed. Ha ha boy, are you challenging the Hokage? Well, not fatal. I really wonder how strong you are at Taijutsu. Oh, so this is a Taijutsu duel. Well, with your abilities, it makes sense. Having slightly scratched his beard, Hiruzen stood up abruptly and, laughing, said. I haven't needed bones for a long time, I haven't fought with boys like you since the days of the academy, when I was an instructor. But sparring with that kind of talent would be fun. Yes, and useful for you. Let's go. Waving his hand, Hiruzen quickly walked to the door and left. Shikamaru kept up. It didn't take long for the two to reach the training ground. On the way, Hiruzen managed to ask Shikamaru about his family, training and even plans for the future. Many of the old man's themes, one way or another, related to Shikamaru's worldview, and maybe unconsciously, but the Hokage wanted to reveal some of the guy's character traits. He wanted to make sure he had the will of fire in him, even if he was still a child. When they did arrive, Shikamaru finally breathed a sigh of relief. He had planned this sparring of course, but this Hokage turned out to be quite talkative. Moreover, Shikamaru had to be careful with this old man and carefully think over his answers. So when they finally arrived, the guy was happy. Stopping 10 paces from Shikamaru, Hiruzen put down his hat and threw off his white cape, remaining only in the red Hokage uniform. After that, he stood up and asked. Ready? Shikamaru nodded curtly and immediately attacked. Not bad. Dodging Shikamaru's leg with a slight movement, Hiruzen continued to dodge the rest of the attacks. *********. The foliage rose into the air, and the Hokage continued to dodge all of Shikamaru's attacks. But at some point, he began to accelerate, which noticeably surprised the old man. He's not easy. Although Hiruzen could continue to dodge, he decided to finally look at the guy in action. ******. The first block marked the beginning of serious sparring. At the same instant, several bones crawled out of Shikamaru's body. Hiruzen frowned slightly and began to attack himself. Shikamaru, in turn, simply decided to block the blow with a hand covered with sharp spikes. Raizeenn smiled slightly and instantly disappeared, finding himself at the same second behind the guy's back. Bark. The kick landed directly on the right shoulder, from which Shikamaru flew a couple of meters and finally stabilized. Raizeenn looked at his leg and smiled a little. Not a bad reaction. The old man's leg was bleeding a little, and at the same moment a sharp bone slowly disappeared under the skin on Shikamaru's right shoulder. Noticing the Hokage's condition, Shikamaru only sighed. As I thought, my bones are not that dangerous to you. Raizeenn stood up again and smiled. Although I am an old man, I have not forgotten how to use chakra yet. I've only seen the owner of a Shikatsumiyaku a couple of times in my life, and only my teacher fought one of them. But of course he wasn't using taijutsu. Going against the owner of this genome with bare hands is just suicide. But there is one way to minimize injury. Before he could finish, Shikamaru chuckled. Chakra control. Exactly, Starkey nodded. If you distribute chakra correctly, then it is quite possible to protect body parts. But just as important are instincts and skills. Of course, it still depends on your physical energy. Well, and also, the fact is that you are still a child. Your bone only left a scratch on me, but if you were an experienced jonin, I'm afraid it would be hard for me. I probably wouldn't have won in taijutsu. Using regular taijutsu against Shikatsumiyaku is a big mistake. With a slight wave of his hand, Raizeenn chuckled. Okay, we still have time to discuss our fight. We are not finished. You said that you will show me something, maybe you will already start. Shikamaru's lips parted in a satisfied grin, and his eyes narrowed slightly. Then let's get started. Raizeenn smiled and waited for Shikamaru's next step. He slowly began to unbind his hands, which made the old man smile a little. He knew very well what was hidden under these bandages. I decided to take them off. Let's see what you show me now. Under the bandages were several small weights with fuin seals attached to them. After dropping a few pounds off his hands and then off his feet, Shikamaru immediately felt noticeably lighter. The weights were small, but even a few kilograms were enough for his body, so having freed himself from them, he noticeably added in maneuverability. But this was not the main thing that he wanted to accomplish. Very soon even the Hokage will be shocked. Hope you like the video. Like, share and subscribe the channel. Also make sure you tell me your recommendation in the comment section down below. Thanks for watching.